Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most dramatic and consequential developments on the Eastern Front of the war in Ukraine. What is unfolding around Pokrovsk is not just another localized setback for Russian forces. What we are witnessing is a systemic breakdown, a collapse that exposes deep structural weaknesses in Russia's military strategy, logistics, command, and morale. Reports of losses reaching a staggering 15-to-1 ratio are not just numbers on a screen. They represent a battlefield reality that is reshaping the balance of power in this sector and sending shockwaves through Moscow's war planning. To understand why Pokrovsk matters so much, we need to step back and look at the broader picture. Pokrovsk is not merely a town on a map. It is a logistical artery, a key hub connecting supply routes, rail lines, and road networks that feed Russian operations across a wide stretch of the Donetsk region. For months, Russian planners viewed Pokrovsk as a gateway, a stepping stone toward deeper territorial control. Instead, it has become a graveyard for men, machines, and illusions. The Russian approach to the Pokrovsk front followed a familiar pattern. Heavy artillery barrages, waves of infantry assaults, and armored pushes designed to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses through sheer mass. On paper, this doctrine relies on attrition, the idea that Russia can absorb higher losses and eventually grind down Ukrainian resistance. But the battlefield has changed, and Pokrovsk has brutally exposed the limits of this thinking. Ukrainian forces did not meet these assaults head-on in the way Russian commanders expected. Instead, they shaped the battlefield long before the first major push began. Precision strikes, intelligence, driven targeting, and layered defenses turned Russian numerical strength into a liability. Every road, every tree line, every open field around Pokrovsk became a kill zone. Drones hovered constantly overhead, feeding real-time data to artillery units and mobile strike teams. Russian columns moved forward blind, while Ukrainian defenders saw everything. This is where the 15-to-1 loss ratio becomes crucial. Such a figure is not the result of a single failed attack or an unlucky day. It is the outcome of sustained tactical superiority. Russian units repeatedly advanced into well-prepared positions without adequate reconnaissance, electronic warfare support, or coordination. Ukrainian forces, by contrast, operated with a clear understanding of Russian movement patterns, supply schedules, and command structures. One of the most devastating factors for Russian forces at Pokrovsk has been the collapse of logistics. Modern warfare is not won by bravery alone. It is won by fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, and the ability to move them efficiently. Ukrainian strikes systematically targeted supply convoys, ammunition depots, and fuel storage sites feeding the Pokrovsk front. Each successful strike did more than destroy material. It created cascading failures. Tanks ran out of fuel. Artillery units rationed shells. Infantry units went hungry and exhausted. As supplies dried up, morale followed. Russian soldiers on the Pokrovsk front have been fighting under increasingly desperate conditions. Accounts from intercepted communications and captured personnel paint a grim picture. Units sent into combat without adequate support, wounded soldiers left behind due to lack of evacuation capability, commanders issuing orders they know cannot be executed. This is not the image of a confident, advancing army. It is the portrait of a force under immense strain. Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders have turned flexibility into a weapon. Rather than holding rigid lines, they conducted elastic defense. When pressure mounted in one area, they withdrew in good order, drawing Russian forces deeper into exposed positions. Then came the counterstrikes: precision artillery fire, drone, dropped munitions, and sudden infantry assaults shattered Russian units that were already disorganized and depleted. The psychological impact of these tactics cannot be overstated. Russian soldiers advancing toward Pokrovsk were not just facing enemy fire. They were facing uncertainty at every step. The knowledge that a drone might be watching, that an artillery strike could land at any moment, erodes confidence and initiative. Over time, this fear becomes paralyzing. Units hesitate, orders are delayed, opportunities are missed. In war, hesitation kills. Command failures have further compounded Russia's problems. The centralized command structure favored by Russian doctrine has struggled to adapt to the fluid, fast-changing conditions around Pokrovsk. Decisions that should be made in minutes are delayed for hours as information travels up and down the chain of command. Ukrainian forces, operating with greater autonomy at lower levels, have exploited this rigidity. Small units make rapid decisions based on real-time intelligence, striking when and where Russian defenses are weakest. Another critical element of the Pokrovsk collapse is the depletion of experienced Russian personnel. Early in the war, Russia relied heavily on professional soldiers and elite units. Over time, many of these formations have been worn down or destroyed. At Pokrovsk, a significant portion of the attacking force has consisted of recently mobilized troops with limited training and minimal combat experience. Thrown into one of the most lethal environments on the front, these soldiers faced overwhelming challenges. Training gaps manifested everywhere: poor coordination between infantry and armor, inadequate use of cover and concealment, failure to adapt tactics after repeated losses. Ukrainian forces, by contrast, have benefited from hard-earned experience and continuous adaptation. Lessons learned in earlier battles have been applied ruthlessly at Pokrovsk. Mistakes are corrected quickly. Successful tactics are refined and repeated. The terrain itself has also played a decisive role. The area around Pokrovsk offers a mix of open fields, industrial zones, and urban structures. Ukrainian defenders have exploited this complexity masterfully. In urban areas, they turned buildings into fortified positions, channeling Russian advances into narrow corridors. In open terrain, they used long-range fires and drones to strike before Russian units could close the distance. The result was a battlefield where Russian forces were always at a disadvantage, regardless of the environment. As losses mounted, Russian commanders attempted to adjust by increasing the intensity of bombardments. But artillery without intelligence is blunt and inefficient. Ukrainian units dispersed, relocated, and reappeared elsewhere, minimizing casualties while preserving combat power. Russian shells fell on empty positions, wasted in vast numbers, while Ukrainian precision strikes continued to hit high-altitude targets. The concept of total collapse at the Pokrovsk front does not mean that every Russian unit has vanished overnight. Collapse in military terms often unfolds gradually, then suddenly. First comes the loss of initiative, then the erosion of cohesion, finally the breakdown of command and control. At Pokrovsk, all three stages are visible. Russian forces are reacting rather than acting. Units are isolated from one another. Communications are unreliable. The front becomes brittle, vulnerable to decisive breakthroughs. Ukrainian commanders understand this dynamic well. Rather than rushing headlong into risky assaults, they are applying sustained pressure, probing for weak points, forcing Russian forces to stretch thinner and thinner. Every successful strike amplifies the sense of inevitability. Every failed Russian counterattack reinforces the perception that the situation is slipping out of control. The strategic implications of a collapse at Pokrovsk extend far beyond the immediate area. If Russian forces cannot stabilize this front, they risk a domino effect across neighboring sectors. Supply routes disrupted here affect operations elsewhere. Reserves diverted to plug gaps at Pokrovsk are reserves not available for other critical areas. The Russian military machine, already strained, faces impossible choices. Politically, the situation is equally damaging for the Kremlin. Narratives of steady progress and inevitable victory are hard to maintain in the face of such disproportionate losses. While state media may downplay or distort events, reality has a way of surfacing. Families notice when sons do not return. Communities feel the impact of repeated mobilizations. The gap between official rhetoric and lived experience grows wider. For Ukraine, the Battle of Pokrovsk represents more than a defensive success. It is a demonstration of how modern warfare can favor agility, intelligence, and precision over sheer numbers. It shows that a motivated, well-led force can inflict catastrophic losses on a larger opponent by fighting smarter, not harder. This lesson resonates not only on the battlefield, but also among Ukraine's international partners. Supporters watching from abroad see tangible results. Equipment, training, and intelligence assistance are translating into real battlefield advantages. Every destroyed Russian tank, every failed assault, reinforces the argument that continued support makes a difference. Pokrovsk becomes a case study, a powerful example of what sustained commitment can achieve. Yet, despite the grim outlook for Russian forces, the battle is not over. A collapsing front is still dangerous. Desperate armies can lash out unpredictably. Russian commanders may attempt drastic measures, committing remaining reserves or escalating bombardments in a bid to regain control. Ukrainian forces must remain vigilant, disciplined, and patient. Overconfidence is the enemy of success. The human cost of this collapse cannot be ignored. Behind every statistic lies a life forever altered or ended. War at Pokrovsk has left shattered equipment, ruined landscapes, and deep trauma on both sides. For Ukraine, defending their land comes at immense sacrifice. For Russian soldiers, many of whom may not fully understand why they are fighting, the cost is equally devastating. As we look ahead, the question is not simply whether Pokrovsk will fall or hold. The deeper question is what this battle reveals about the trajectory of the war itself. A 15-to-1 loss ratio is unsustainable. No military, regardless of size, can endure such attrition indefinitely. If similar patterns continue across the front, Russia will face a strategic reckoning. In the end, Pokrovsk stands as a symbol of how preparation, adaptability, and determination can turn the tide, a symbol of how outdated doctrines crumble when confronted with modern realities, and a symbol of how this war, far from being decided by brute force alone, is being shaped by intelligence, innovation, and the will of those who refuse to surrender. As events continue to unfold, one thing is clear: the Pokrovsk front is not just under pressure, it is unraveling. And in that unraveling, we may be witnessing a turning point that echoes far beyond a single battlefield. Stay with us, stay informed, and as always, thank you for watching.